Morning, you guys. I hope you're all doing all right. Remember, just going back to yesterday, that your sharecropping article or questions were due, okay, as well as your record of our times. Hopefully, you guys got all that turned in. And reminding you that your portfolio, no matter who your house teacher is due by Friday. Okay, making sure we're getting that stuff turned in. Today, we're going to continue with our talk on Reconstruction. For the next couple days, we're going to be focused on the KKK and other white supremacist terrorist organizations that emerged in the South during Reconstruction. And obviously, we know a number of those organizations have continued even till today. We're focused on the time period of Reconstruction, though. Okay, so today you have 3 articles that we're going to go through all together, and on your Google Classroom, right, they're all under the CFU. So making sure we are answering that CFU today, and that you have those 3 articles out so we can go through them together right now. And so the first one is investigating the KKK lesson 1, okay, looking at the rise of the KKK. Okay, so that's one we're going to go through first, and then we'll go through the other 2. Okay, so make sure we are following along. So at the time of Ulysses S. Grant's election to the presidency, white supremacists were conducting a reign of terror throughout the South. In outright defiance of the Republican led federal government, Southern Democrats formed organizations that violently intimidated blacks and Republicans who tried to win political power. The most prominent of these, the Ku Klux Klan, was formed in Pulaski, Tennessee in 1865. Originally founded as a social club for former Confederate soldiers, the Klan evolved into a terrorist organization. It would be responsible for thousands of deaths and would help to weaken the political power of Southern blacks and Republicans. Racist activity in the South often took the form of riots that targeted blacks and Republicans. In 1866, a quarrel between white and black ex-soldiers erupted into a full-fledged riot in Memphis, Tennessee. White policemen assisted the mob in their violent rampage through the black sections of town. By the time the violence ended, 46 people were dead, 70 more were wounded, and numerous churches and schools had been burned. Just 2 months later, on July 30th, a similar outbreak of violence erupted in New Orleans. This time, a white mob attacked the attendees of a black suffrage convention, killing 37 blacks and 3 whites who allied with them. In this violent atmosphere, the Ku Klux Klan grew in size and strength. By 1868, the Klan had evolved into a hooded terrorist organization that its members called the Invisible Empire of the South. The reorganized Klan's first leader, or Grand Wizard, was Nathan Bedford Forrest, who had been a Confederate general during the Civil War. White Southerners from all classes of society joined the Klan's ranks. In the name of preserving law and order in a white-dominated society, Klansmen punished newly freed blacks for a variety of reasons, including having impudent manner towards whites. They whipped the teachers of freedmen's schools and burnt their schoolhouses. But first and foremost, the Klan sought to do away with Republican influence in the South by terrorizing and murdering its party members and all those who voted for it. In the time leading up to the 1868 presidential election, the Klan's activities picked up in speed and brutality. The election, which pitted Republican Ulysses S. Grant against Democrat Horatio Seymour, was crucial. Republicans would continue programs that prevented Southern whites from gaining political control in their states. Klan members knew that given the chance, the blacks in their communities would vote Republican. Across the South, the Klan and other terrorist groups used brutal violence to intimidate Republican voters. In Kansas, over 2,000 murders were committed in connection with the election. In Georgia, the number of threats and beatings was even higher. And in Louisiana, 1,000 blacks were killed as the election neared. In those 3 states, Democrats won decisive victories at the polls. Nevertheless, the Klan's violent actions proved to many Northerners that the South had not learned its lesson in the recent war. In this way, the Klan's activities actually backfired. People realized that harsher laws would have to be passed in order to stop the violence and protect Southern blacks, and those laws were soon in coming. In the 1868 presidential election, Republican Ulysses S. Grant won the office with the slogan, "Let us have peace." Republicans also won a majority in Congress. Many Northerners, disgusted by Klan violence, lent their support to the 15th Amendment, which gave the vote to black men in every state, and the first Reconstruction Act of 1867, which placed harsher restrictions on the South and closely regulated the formation of their new governments. Other legislation attacked the Klan more directly. Between 1870 and 1871, Congress passed the Enforcement Acts, which made it a crime to interfere with registration, voting, office holding, or jury service of blacks. More than 5,000 people were indicted under these laws. A little more than 1,000 were convicted. In 1871, Congress also passed the Ku Klux Klan Act, which allowed the government to act against terrorist organizations. Grant did not rigorously enforce these laws, although he did order the arrest of hundreds of Klan members. But with the overwhelming support of the Klan in the South, convictions proved difficult to obtain, and the financial panic of 1873 would distract the North from the problems of Southern racism. In 1882, the United States Supreme Court declared the Ku Klux Klan Act unconstitutional. So we'll go back through that and kind of break it down, but are there any immediate questions from that article? Okay, anything that pops out at us, words, phrases, things that we are unclear about? All right, well, again, as always, if you do have questions, okay, just post them here in the stream and I'll do my best to answer them as we're going through. And we will break down that article now a little bit. Okay. So we see starting off that this isn't just this organization is or has political aspirations, okay? So not necessarily to be voted into office, but they are setting up the society the way they see fit, right? They're trying to, as we've seen with many things during Reconstruction, they're trying to reset the system in the South to be more like it was before the Civil War, where slavery was a thing, right? Where whites were in charge, right? There was a social hierarchy where whites were held to be supreme. Obviously, we know that's not true, right? There's no basis for that, okay? But that is the way people saw it, right? And so these Southern Democrats, right, are trying to reinstitute that system, okay, whereas Northern Republicans, particularly the radical Republicans, right, are trying to push new changes into their society. Okay? So the Ku Klux Klan, or the KKK, right, is founded in 1865, okay, so right at the end of the Civil War, okay, and it starts out as just a group for Confederate soldiers, right? The war is over, okay, so these soldiers want to get together, okay, but it turns into a terrorist organization, right? And it's going to kill thousands of people just during Reconstruction. And obviously, this is an organization that still exists today, okay, and so I'm not sure what their death count would be today, but it's at least thousands of people. And so we see in our third paragraph, right, we see that both blacks and whites who support the Republican parties are the target, okay, of the KKK, right? They're trying to use violence and intimidation to get what they want. So the two examples that we see in that paragraph, okay, we see that 46 people were killed in one, okay, and 37 in another, and those are just two attacks, right? Those are not by any stretch all of them. Okay, but the big thing that I want you to take a look at in that third paragraph is where it says white policemen assisted the mobs in their violent rampage. Okay, so remember, even with all these new Reconstruction law amendments and laws, right, trying to set up equality in the South and trying to change the system, most people in charge, right, are still white. Okay, most of the policemen, most of the people in government. Okay, and as we saw last week, right, lots of African Americans are starting to get the right to vote, right, and that allows them to vote each other into office, right? So we're seeing more African American representation, but it's still not the majority. Okay? And so we're seeing that people in law enforcement are supporting the KKK, which, as we looked at a little bit later, makes it very hard to get them in trouble, right? Because obviously they're breaking the law, right? And the law doesn't allow for the KKK to act, right? Even the racist laws do not make it okay. But because the people who are supposed to enforce the law are either members or they agree with them, so even if they're not members of the KKK, they might still agree with what they're doing. Because of that, okay, it makes it very hard to get them in trouble. Okay. Right. And so people from all sections of society, right, from very poor whites, right, to very rich whites, people who have been in power for a long time, okay, whatever it is, okay, all sorts of people are joining the Klan. Okay? And again, they're focused on destroying African American rights. They're focused on getting Republicans out of office, both whites and blacks that are supporting the Republican Party. Because remember, at this time, the Republican Party is the group that is trying to change things. Okay, so burning down schools, right, particularly those set up by the Freedmen's Bureau, which we talked about last week. Okay? And so one of the ways that the government tries to deal with this, right, is by keeping the Union Army in the South and by passing things like, what was it? The Ku Klux Klan Act, which is going to allow them to use federal people to charge the KKK. So if you arrest someone from the KKK, right, this act would say that a federal judge, right, gets to hear the case, not a local judge. Right now, and if we remember with our Bill of Rights, right, you have the right to be tried by a jury of your peers, right? So they're taking it out of the state, out of the local area, because, right, many of the locals supported the Klan, right? So even if they weren't members, right, they would still support, right? So they would put the person in court, right? They say, okay, we arrested you for using violence and intimidation, right, for being a terrorist, right, against African Americans in the South, and then, right, all this guy's neighbors would say, no, he's not guilty, even if the evidence pointed that way, because they agreed with what he was doing. Right? And obviously, that's not something that happens every time, but it happened a lot. Okay, so it made it very hard to get them in trouble. So that's why they passed this act. So they said, no, we're going to take this case and we're going to take it out of the local area and we're going to try it in federal court, right? And let federal officials who are more likely to get them in trouble because they don't agree with those tactics. And later on down the line, the Supreme Court is going to say you're not allowed to do that, right? Maybe it's for a good reason, but that's illegal, right? It's unconstitutional, right? So that law is going to get dismissed later on. Yeah. Any questions here? And so that's kind of broad strokes looking at the KKK and what's going on at this time. The next two we're going to look at are primary sources, which are going to give us a clearer picture of some specific examples dealing with the KKK and other white terrorist organizations here during Reconstruction. Okay, so I'd like you guys to go ahead and open up lesson 2 there, okay, which is the KKK during Reconstruction. Okay, so if you have that article open, remember it is on your Google Classroom. And this is a newspaper report from Shelby County. Okay, it's from December 3rd, 1868. It's talking about the Klan activities in central Alabama. Okay, so the deep South, right? Looking at Alabama. Movements of the Mystic Klan. A reliable correspondent writes as follows to a friend in Memphis from Florence, Alabama. About a week ago, Saturday night, the Ku Klux came to town to regulate matters. They were here from 11 p.m. to 3 o'clock a.m., 500 in all. They shot one very bad Negro, putting 6 balls through his head. Many heard the noise, but did not know what was going on. They also hung 3 or 4 Negroes nearly dead and whipped others severely in order to make them tell about their nightly meetings and what their object was in holding the same, also as to who their leaders were. They made a clean breast of the whole matter, telling everything. The strongest thing about these Ku Klux was that they did not hesitate to unmask themselves when asked to do so. and out of the party, none were identified. Everyone who saw them says their houses were more beautiful than and far superior to any in the country round about. They spoke but little, but always to a purpose. They went to several stores and knocked. The doors were opened at once. They then called for rope, and at each place a coil was rolled out to them. They cut it in suitable length to hang a man with. No one asked for money, and they offered none. They did not disturb anyone else, nor did they take anything except few Enfield rifles which were found in possession of some very bad Negroes. They called on the revenue officer and passed a few remarks with him. What transpired is not known, but it has made a great improvement in his conversation. The visitant's advent has been productive of much good and benefit to the community, though all regret such steps should have to be resorted to. Everyone says, "Give us peace," and really I believe them to be truly sincere. Okay. So again, obviously, as we've talked about several times, right, language in the primary source that we're using, right, is not language that we would use, right, in conversation. Yeah, so just making sure we're clear on that. Any quick questions before we dive into what this is saying and kind of breaking it down? All right. So let's go in. Okay, so someone is writing, right, about what happened in Florence, Alabama, okay, telling a friend in Memphis, okay, kind of what was going on in their town. Okay, so KKK came into the town, right, from 11 to 3. Okay, so about 4 hours they were in town, 500 of them. Right, it says 500 in all, right? That is an enormous group of people. Okay, they shoot one African American man, right, 6 times in the head, right? Says they're going to hang 3 or 4 until they're almost dead, right? So hang them up like they're executing them. And it says nearly dead, so it doesn't seem like they executed him here, but that's still, right, an incredibly horrific experience, right? And they're going to whip others, okay, in order to make them say what they're meeting about, right? So it's saying that the African Americans were having meetings, which, right, according to the Constitution, they are perfectly within their rights to do that, right? Freedom of assembly. So it's saying where they were meeting, right? What was the point of their meeting? Who their leaders were, right? So this is all, right, using violence and torture in order to find out about the African Americans organizing. Okay, which, remember, many of the black codes throughout the South, right, are trying to prevent African Americans from organizing, from being able to stand up for their rights. Okay, so the black codes are the legal aspect of that, and then the KKK is the violent terrorist part of that same idea, right, trying to intimidate African Americans, right, and kill any who stand up, right, to get their rights. Okay, so it's saying that the people they tortured told everything, right, and it says that the KKK, right, the members, they didn't mind taking off their masks, right? It says they did not hesitate to unmask themselves when they were asked, and none were identified. Okay, so even without the masks, nobody in town was going to say who they were. But it says that everyone who saw them says their horses were more beautiful than anyone around, right? So these are people who are well off, right? Have good horses, right? But no one's going to name names. Okay, so whether they recognize them or not, okay, no one's speaking up against them. Okay, and it could be because they're scared, right, about from the violence. That's a possibility. Where we're going to look at a little further, where I think it doesn't quite seem that way, but it's certainly possible. Okay, or that they agree with what they're doing. Okay, and it says at the very end, right, that the person writing thinks that this occurrence, right, did a lot of good for the community, right? He's happy about how it went, about how it turned out. And it says that he regrets, right, that we needed to do this, but he's like, it's better that it happened, right? So the person writing this seems to clearly be against African American rights. He doesn't like that they're meeting, right? Doesn't like that they're fighting for equality. Okay. not a huge fan of the violence, but he says, okay, the KKK is okay because they're doing the right thing in his perspective, right? It's like, oh, it sucks that was necessary, but he's on board. And going back again to the middle, that whenever members of the KKK were knocking on doors, people opened it up right away. They gave them whatever they wanted, right? So they gave them rope, they gave them anything they needed, they gave them rifles. So all these things are being offered to them, okay, as soon as they knock on a door. Okay. So again, you can say that they were being intimidated, right? And so they were scared. That's a possibility. Okay, we're not hearing from those people. But a lot of people just agree with them, right? And agree with what they're doing, even if they're not willing to do it themselves. Okay, which is a really terrible thing. Okay. Yes, they're absolutely still, we have a question, right? If people are still scared, okay, of the KKK and wouldn't identify them, absolutely, right? It's still an organization that exists today, not just in the South, but around the country. I don't know if you guys saw a few weeks ago, there was a news story about since we're required to wear masks right now going to stores, someone wore a KKK hood as their mask going to the store down in, I believe it was San Diego. I don't remember absolutely, but right there, they're still around, even out in California, right? We tend to be a more liberal state, but they're all across the country. Yeah, so it's I'd say it's still a very scary organization, right? That can use intimidation tactics. Yeah. Any questions left on this article? Okay, we're going to do one more today. All right, so I would like you to open up the third lesson, right? It's also called the KKK during Reconstruction. This one's much shorter. And we're going to go through this last one. So on July 11th, 1870, Klansmen lynched Canadian Methodist minister William Luke in Cross Plains or Petona, Calhoun County. Luke's offense in the eyes of the Klansmen was having instructed black freedmen in reading and writing, thereby stirring them up to insubordination. Before they hanged him, the Klansmen acceded to Luke's request to write a farewell letter to his family. After the murder, the farewell note gained wide currency in northern newspapers. My dear wife, I died tonight. It has been so determined by those who think I deserve it. God only knows I feel myself entirely innocent of the charge. I have only sought to educate the Negro. I little thought when leaving you that we should thus part forever so distant from each other. But God's will be done. He will be to you a husband better than I have been, and a father to our 6 little ones. Your loving husband, William. And this was a letter quoted in Gene L. Howard, Death at Cross Plains, a Reconstruction, Alabama tragedy. Okay, and that's being kept in Tuscaloosa, University of Alabama. Okay. So we see here, right, that it's not, it's anyone who is involved with promoting African American rights. Okay. So we have a Canadian, right, a minister. Methodist is a Christian denomination, right? So kind of like a priest, right? A minister is kind of like a priest. So Canadian minister comes into Alabama, okay, and the KKK are going to lynch him, right? They're going to hang him on their own, right? They don't have the court's permission or anything like that. They have no legal standing, but they are going to kill him. Okay, and for them, what this man did that was so horrible that they needed to kill him was he was teaching African Americans, right, to read and write. Okay, possibly at one of the Freeman Bureau schools. Okay, it doesn't say for sure, but he's teaching them, right? And in the Klan's mind, right, that is stirring them up. If you're teaching them, right, if you're educating them, you're giving them the power, right, to be able to stand up, to be able to fight for what's right. Yeah. And so that was why they killed him, right? To try and prevent that from happening and to try and scare other teachers away from not so that they wouldn't teach, and other African American students away from being involved in learning, right? So they're using this, right? Again, it's a terrorist organization using intimidation, terror, right? This is a terrifying thing to happen, okay? What we saw in the last article as well as this one, right, is extremely scary, right? And so that's the whole idea behind their actions. Yeah. Any questions from the 3 articles that we looked at today? Right, we looked at the one kind of general, what is generally going on, okay, and then a couple primary sources there. Okay. As always, you are welcome to reach out, okay, whether via this channel, via Google Classroom, or email me if you do have any questions. Okay, I know that by looking at that, it's a, it's a big deal, right? It's kind of strange to be looking at. I know, right? You guys said you probably haven't gotten to look at this in much detail before, okay, and it's a scary thing. Okay, so you're welcome to reach out. Okay, as always, like I've told you all year, right? I'm not going to sugarcoat things, right? I'm going to try and give you guys, right, the truth about what happens and let you guys make your own judgments from there. Yeah. So we're going to continue to look at the KKK and white supremacist organizations for the remainder of this week. I don't think that I'm going to do a YouTube channel on Thursday, but I will still have one tomorrow, and we'll look at the articles that I'll post for the rest of the week tomorrow. Okay, so it may be a little longer tomorrow, okay, but it'll be for both Wednesday and Thursday. All right, so making sure we are doing those CFUs, making sure you've turned in your record of our time, as well as the sharecropping article that we looked at yesterday. Yeah, so taking a look at that, making sure you've turned everything in. Okay, again, we're very close to the end of the year. Okay, so you got to get these last assignments in. Okay, our grades are going to be due very soon. Okay, so staying on top of it. Okay, almost there. If there aren't any more questions, okay, we're going to wrap this up for today. Okay, again, make sure portfolio, you are on top of that. Getting that turned in is due no later than Friday. Okay, so please stay on top of that. All right, hope you guys are well, and I will see you guys tomorrow. All right, goodbye.